It was May 25th, 1979, the start of Memorial Day weekend. Chicago O'Hare International Airport was buzzing with travelers. The sun hung low in the afternoon sky, glinting off the silver fuselages lined up on the tarmac. Gate C2 of Terminal 1 was unusually busy. Flight attendants greeted passengers with warm smiles, children tugged at their parents' hands, and the air hummed with the sound of rolling suitcases and boarding calls. American Airlines Flight 191. A McDonnell Douglas DC-1010 stood tall and gleaming at the gate. It was bound for Los Angeles, California, carrying 258 passengers and 13 crew members. For many, it was just another routine flight, a few hours to the coast, a chance to start their holiday early. Some were families heading for Disneyland. Others were business professionals hoping to get home for the weekend. A newlywed couple was among them, smiling and taking photos before boarding. No one had any idea that this would be their last journey. In the cockpit, Captain Walter Lux, a veteran pilot with over 22,000 flight hours, prepared for departure alongside First Officer James Dillard and Flight Engineer Alfred Udovich. The three men were calm and confident, chatting lightly as they moved through the pre-flight checklist. Lux had flown countless times out of O'Hare, one of the world's busiest airports, and knew every runway by heart. Outside, ground crews fueled the aircraft, loaded luggage, and performed their final visual inspections. The DC-10, tail number N110AA, was one of American Airlines' flagship aircraft, large, powerful, and built for long-haul comfort. To the passengers looking out the terminal windows, it seemed invincible. At 2:50 p.m., boarding was complete. The cabin door was closed, and the jet bridge slowly retracted. Inside, the flight attendants demonstrated the safety briefing, while the engines began to hum to life. A gentle vibration filled the cabin as the aircraft pushed back from the gate. Passengers glanced out the windows, watching as the terminal slipped away. Flight attendants, "Prepare for takeoff," came the announcement from the cockpit. The aircraft taxied toward runway 32R, joining a line of departing planes. From the control tower, air traffic controllers cleared Flight 191 for takeoff. The crew performed their last checks. Engine pressure, hydraulic systems, and flight controls all showed green. Everything was normal. American 191, cleared for takeoff. "Cleared for takeoff, 191, replied Captain Lux. At 3:02 p.m., Lux advanced the throttles. The three General Electric CF6 engines roared, shaking the ground beneath them. The aircraft surged forward, accelerating rapidly down the runway. Inside, passengers were pressed back into their seats as the giant DC-10 gained speed. 100 knots, then 150. The runway lights blurred past the "Windows, V1, called Dillard. "The speed beyond which takeoff must continue, even if there's an engine failure." "Rotate," said Lux calmly. The nose lifted. The DC-10 rose gracefully off the ground, wheels tucking up beneath the fuselage. For a brief moment, everything looked perfect. The Chicago skyline shimmered in the distance, and families inside the plane smiled as they felt the familiar weightlessness of flight. But just seconds after liftoff, disaster began to unfold. Unbeknownst to the crew, a hidden structural weakness was waiting to fail. As the aircraft climbed past 300 feet, the left engine, mounted under the wing, suddenly ripped away from its pylon with tremendous force. The engine, weighing more than 10,000 pounds, shot upward, shearing through hydraulic lines and wiring before crashing down onto the runway below. Inside the cockpit, warning lights flashed across the instrument panel. The pilots felt the jolt but didn't yet realize the full extent of the damage. In an instant, they lost key readings from their left side, including critical systems that helped them control the plane's slats and hydraulics. On the ground, witnesses gasped. People near the airport fence saw a flash of sparks, followed by the engine tumbling away from the wing. One mechanic watching from the ramp shouted into his radio, "That DC-10 just lost an engine." Yet inside the cabin, most passengers felt only a sudden vibration, a momentary shudder. The plane still seemed to be climbing, but the damage had already doomed the flight. Without the left engine, the slats on that wing retracted, disrupting airflow and destroying lift. The aircraft began to roll slightly left, and the pilots struggled to compensate. Their instruments were giving false readings, making it nearly impossible to understand what was happening. In the control tower, radar screens showed Flight 191 rising steadily, then starting to tilt. Controllers called out frantically, "American 191 Heavy, you're losing altitude." No response. The aircraft's radio had gone silent. As it passed just beyond the runway, the DC-10 banked harder left, its wings slicing through the air at a steep angle. From the ground, it looked as though the giant plane hung suspended for a second against the blue sky. Then, it began to fall. What started as a routine takeoff had turned in mere seconds into the beginning of America's deadliest aviation disaster. Just moments after liftoff, American Airlines Flight 191 climbed gracefully into the clear blue sky. For the passengers on board, there was no reason to feel uneasy. The gentle hum of the engines, the tilt of the wings, and the feeling of ascent were all part of every normal takeoff. But at 3:02:38 p.m., only seconds after the plane left the runway, the unimaginable happened. A deep metallic crack echoed through the left side of the aircraft. The number one engine, the massive General Electric CF6 turbofan mounted beneath the left wing, suddenly tore loose from its pylon. The engine shot upward and backward, smashing into the edge of the wing before plummeting toward the runway below. Witnesses on the ground saw the horrific moment in real time. People waiting near the airport fence froze in disbelief as they saw a bright burst of sparks, followed by a flaming object tumbling away from the aircraft. Some thought it was a tire, others thought it was an explosion. But those closest to the runway realized the truth almost instantly. The entire left engine had separated from the airplane. The engine hit the ground with a heavy impact, bouncing and breaking apart, scattering metal fragments and smoke. A few seconds later, firefighters on standby at O'Hare began scrambling toward the runway, not yet knowing that the worst was still to come. Inside the cockpit, Captain Walter Lux, First Officer James Dillard, and Flight Engineer Alfred Udovich felt a violent jolt. Warning lights erupted across the flight panel, red, amber, flashing, each one signaling a failure somewhere in the aircraft's systems. The sudden loss of the engine caused severe hydraulic pressure drops and electrical disconnections that instantly crippled several key instruments. "Engine failure, number 1. Dillard shouted, scanning the panel. But this wasn't a normal engine failure. The engine hadn't just stopped. It was gone. It had ripped away completely, tearing through hydraulic lines and electrical circuits inside the wing. The pilots, unaware that the engine had physically detached, began performing standard emergency procedures. They believed they were dealing with a single engine failure, something that commercial pilots were trained to handle. But within seconds, the DC-10 began to behave erratically. The slats on the left wing, the small panels that extend during takeoff to increase lift, had retracted automatically when the hydraulic lines were severed. That meant the left wing lost lift, while the right wing continued to generate full lift, causing the plane to roll sharply to the left. From the control tower, air traffic controllers could see the unfolding tragedy. The giant silver aircraft was climbing, but something was clearly wrong. The left wing dipped dangerously low, and the plane appeared to wobble. "American 191 Heavy, you appear to be losing altitude," one controller called over the radio. No response. Inside the cockpit, the pilots struggled desperately to level the wings. Captain Lux pulled hard on the control column, trying to keep the nose up. The plane's control systems were sluggish, almost unresponsive. The instrument panel on the captain's side had gone dark. The loss of electrical power from the left side made it nearly impossible for him to read the gauges. Dillard tried to cross-check his instruments, but the readings didn't make sense. The plane was climbing but rolling. The left wing felt dead. Every correction they made only seemed to worsen the imbalance. At 3:03 p.m., Flight 191 reached about 325 feet. The plane began banking sharply to the left, the angle increasing second by second. Passengers on the left side saw the ground spinning up toward them through their windows. Panic spread through the cabin. Screams, gasps, and prayers filled the air. Flight attendants tried to calm passengers, but the aircraft's violent tilt made it impossible to move. Outside, hundreds of onlookers watched in horror. One mechanic from another airline standing near the hangar later described it. The plane just kept rolling over. I could see the top of the fuselage. It was upside down before it went down. As the plane rolled past 112 degrees, the left wingtip pointed almost straight toward the ground. The aircraft's nose began to drop. There was no time, no altitude, no control left. Mayday! Someone began to transmit from the cockpit, but the radio cut off mid-word. In the next few seconds, Flight 191 entered a deadly left bank. Its nose dipped sharply, the engines on the right wing roaring at full thrust as the pilots fought to regain control. But gravity had taken over. The DC-10, weighing nearly 400,000 pounds, began to fall, nose down, banking left, its wings slicing through the air at terrifying speed. From the ground, the control tower could only watch in silence. One controller shouted, "They're going down!" At 3:04 p.m., less than 31 seconds after takeoff, the radar blip of Flight 191 vanished from the screen. Those last seconds were a blur of chaos, alarms blaring, shouts in the cockpit, and a cabin full of terrified passengers holding on to each other. The massive aircraft, once a symbol of engineering power and human confidence, was now plummeting helplessly toward an open field just beyond the airport boundary. And in the control tower, all that remained was silence. At 3:04 p.m., just 31 seconds after takeoff, American Airlines Flight 191 vanished from radar. What was supposed to be a routine climb to cruising altitude became one of the most catastrophic moments in aviation history. Witnesses near Des Plaines, Illinois, watched in horror as the enormous McDonnell Douglas DC-10 banked steeply to its left. Its wings nearly inverted. Some said it looked as if the aircraft tried to roll back upright, but it was too late. In a final desperate moment, the pilots pulled back on the yoke, trying to regain lift. The engines on the right wing screamed at full thrust, but gravity was stronger. The giant silver aircraft descended nose first toward an empty stretch of open ground just beyond the airport's fence line. At 3:04:05 p.m., Flight 191 struck the earth with unimaginable force. The impact was devastating. The plane hit the ground nearly upside down at more than 250 miles per hour, disintegrating instantly. The fuselage collapsed and burst apart, scattering debris across a massive area. The fuel tanks exploded, releasing 20,000 gallons of jet fuel that ignited into a blinding orange fireball. A pillar of flames and black smoke shot hundreds of feet into the air, visible across the entire Chicago skyline. Drivers on the nearby Touhy Avenue slammed their brakes, stunned by the explosion that looked like a bomb had gone off. One eyewitness, a truck driver, later said, "It looked like the whole sky caught fire." The ground shook like an earthquake. Flames engulfed the crash site instantly. The force of the explosion was so violent that nearby trailers and vehicles at an old trailer park storage area burst into flames. Fire spread across the field, devouring everything in its path. Burning metal, shattered luggage, and twisted wreckage scattered over several hundred yards. Inside the airport, controllers in the tower stared in disbelief. Seconds earlier, Flight 191 had been climbing steadily. Now, only a towering column of smoke marked where it had been. The room fell silent. One controller whispered, "They're gone." Within minutes, the first rescue units were dispatched. Fire trucks, ambulances, and emergency crews raced through the airport perimeter roads toward the scene. The smell of burning jet fuel and smoke filled the air, thick and suffocating. When firefighters arrived, they were met with an inferno. Flames roared high into the air, fueled by thousands of gallons of aviation fuel. The heat was so intense that rescuers couldn't get closer than a few dozen feet. Even heavy protective suits began to melt under the heat. Fire hoses opened full force, spraying water and foam in every direction, but the blaze seemed endless. One firefighter later said, "You couldn't tell what was plane, what was ground, what was metal. It was all fire." Within 20 minutes, much of the visible fire was under control, but what remained was a scene of absolute devastation. The aircraft was gone. Only scattered, blackened fragments of aluminum and melted steel remained. The tail section had disintegrated. The cockpit had been crushed beyond recognition. Rescue workers began searching for survivors, hoping against hope. But it became clear almost immediately there were none.
Every person on board had died on impact.
The official death toll, 273 people, all 271 on the plane and 2 more on the ground. Local hospitals were placed on standby, expecting injuries that never came. The grim reality sank in as rescue teams began recovering what little was left. Personal belongings, scraps of uniforms, children's toys, pieces of identification burned and bent beyond recognition. By evening, news of the disaster had spread across the country. Television stations interrupted regular programming with breaking news. American Airlines Flight 191 has crashed shortly after takeoff from Chicago O'Hare Airport. There are no survivors. At O'Hare, stunned passengers filled the terminal, many clutching tickets or waiting for loved ones who would never arrive. The American Airlines counter turned into a place of anguish. Company officials gathered families into a private room, breaking the news with quiet, trembling voices. Outside, hundreds of people gathered near the crash site. Some knelt to pray, others just stared in disbelief at the thick smoke rising in the distance. Police tried to keep crowds away as the area was cordoned off for investigators. As night fell, floodlights illuminated the blackened field. Smoke still rose from the smoldering debris, and the faint smell of burning fuel lingered in the air. Firefighters, exhausted and silent, stood side by side as investigators began documenting the wreckage. The only sound that remained was the soft hiss of steam from the cooling metal, the final breath of Flight 191. In less than 1 minute, 273 lives had ended. Among them were entire families, business travelers, newlyweds, and a group of children heading to California for summer vacation. It was the deadliest aviation disaster in U.S. history, a title it would hold for decades. And above Chicago, the sky that had been filled with life and motion only moments earlier was now silent, a silence that felt endless. In the days that followed the crash of American Airlines Flight 191, the scene outside Chicago O'Hare Airport turned somber. The field where the DC-10 had fallen was now a blackened wasteland, scattered wreckage, scorched earth, and silence. The smell of burned metal and jet fuel lingered for days. Police guarded the area as investigators from the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, arrived, determined to uncover what had caused the deadliest aviation accident in U.S. history. The investigation began immediately. Within hours, recovery teams started marking and cataloging every piece of debris. Over 200,000 fragments of twisted aluminum, wires, and engine parts were collected from the field. Each piece told a small part of the story. Investigators knew the plane had lost its left engine just after takeoff, but why the engine had separated remained a mystery. Witnesses described seeing the engine lift up over the wing before falling, a sign that something had gone catastrophically wrong with the pylon, the structure that attached the engine to the wing. To confirm this, investigators began reconstructing parts of the left wing and pylon inside a massive hangar. For weeks they studied every bolt, every fracture, every scrape of metal. Slowly, a picture began to form. The pylon fittings, the metal brackets that held the engine in place, showed signs of severe stress and cracking. But these cracks hadn't formed in flight. They had been there before takeoff. Then came the shocking discovery. Just a few days before the accident, American Airlines maintenance team had performed routine work on the plane's engines. The procedure required removing the engine and pylon, but the manufacturer's manual clearly instructed mechanics to remove the engine first, and then the pylon separately. Instead, to save time and reduce labor, the maintenance team had used a forklift to remove the engine and pylon together, a shortcut that other airlines had also been using. During the process, the heavy engine assembly had shifted slightly, bending the delicate metal structure where the pylon attached to the wing. The damage was invisible to the naked eye, a hidden crack waiting to fail. That single shortcut, saving only a few hours of work, had set the stage for disaster. During takeoff, when the pilots increased engine power to maximum thrust, the stressed metal connection snapped, tearing the engine off the wing. As it separated, it ripped through critical hydraulic lines and electrical wiring, disabling flight controls and instruments. The aircraft became uncontrollable within seconds. When investigators presented their findings, the aviation world was stunned. The DC-10, a symbol of modern engineering, had not failed due to design alone. It had failed because of human error in maintenance. The NTSB's final report, released in December 1979, listed the probable cause: improper maintenance procedures leading to structural failure of the pylon assembly, resulting in the separation of the left engine. The Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, responded immediately. All DC-10 aircraft in the United States were grounded, the first time such an action had been taken on this scale. Airlines around the world followed suit. For weeks, the skies were missing one of the most advanced passenger jets of its era. Engineers and inspectors worked around the clock to ensure that every DC-10 was safe to fly again. Modifications were made, stricter inspection procedures were introduced, and maintenance practices were rewritten from the ground up. But for the families of the victims, no investigation could bring comfort. Across Chicago, grief ran deep. Hundreds of families gathered near O'Hare, waiting for word about their loved ones. Churches held candlelight vigils. At hospitals and city morgues, identification work took weeks. The scale of the tragedy left the city in mourning. In the following years, a memorial was built near Des Plaines, close to the crash site. A peaceful garden with trees, benches, and a polished granite wall engraved with the 273 names of those lost. Every year on May 25th, family members gather there, laying flowers, saying prayers, and remembering the flight that never made it to Los Angeles. The story of Flight 191 became more than just a tragedy. It became a turning point for aviation safety. Airlines across the world changed how they performed maintenance. The FAA introduced tighter oversight, mandatory inspections, and better training for mechanics. Pilots received improved emergency training, and engineers began redesigning how engines were mounted to prevent similar failures. The crash also changed public perception of aviation. People began to realize how even the smallest oversight, a bent piece of metal, a skipped inspection, a single decision to save time, could have unimaginable consequences. For many who lost loved ones, Flight 191 is not just history. It's a memory etched into their lives. Survivors of the victims often say that visiting the memorial feels like standing in a sacred place, a reminder of fragility, responsibility, and the cost of human error. Today, decades later, aviation is far safer than it was in 1979, partly because of what was learned from this tragedy. Every checklist, every inspection, every flight that departs safely carries the legacy of Flight 191. It stands as a somber lesson that aviation safety is written in the memories of those who never made it. Home and near the quiet garden outside Chicago, where the grass has grown back and the wind moves softly through the trees, the names on the memorial still shine, a silent promise that they will never be forgotten.